All right. Hey guys, and welcome to the spring 2023 edition of our Family Forms Clinic training. This is, if you're watching them in order, the first video where we will go through some of the clinic basics like dress code and reporting absences and that kind of thing. The next video is going to be some information about client interviewing, and the third video is going to be a bit about family forms. So let's go ahead and get into it. As I mentioned, this video is about the clinic basics. I know some of you are already plotting to skip this one, but please don't, because this is very much how not to annoy your supervisor. So really good information here, and important things that we expect you to know. Speaking of things we expect you to know, just a quick notice that the information in this training we assume you are going to be familiar with. So I get a lot of folks that basically ask me, do I have to do this? First of all, that's a terrible question to ask because I wouldn't send it to you if I didn't think you should do it. But second, my answer to that is always, well, I get to assume that you know all of these things. So if down the line, you don't report an absence correctly and you get an unexcused absence, or your hours aren't right or something like that, and you haven't followed the right procedures, and you say, well, nobody told me I was supposed to do that, I'm going to say it was in the training. So I really, really strongly recommend viewing this, but this is your notice that if it's included in here and you down the line say, I didn't know that, it's not a defense. So really do make sure you guys watch the training. All right, having given that little notice, let's talk a bit about dress code. So most of you will be in person at the courthouse for your family form shifts. If you do have shifts on the remote helpline, then obviously the dress code is less important because you are not visually seen by folks. But for the Family Forms Clinic, the dress code is what we call casual plus. So what that means is jeans are okay. You can wear plain t-shirts or t-shirts with like your university name or logo, but it's kind of nice casual, right? We don't want bare shoulders. Recently we had to explain to somebody that they couldn't wear just a sports bra. I really hope that that's not something I have to explain again to anyone. So no bare midriffs, no shorts, which I know in the summer sucks, but again, we're trying to look casual but relatively nice. If you'd like to dress up more, you're welcome to. I know some people we've had wear full-on suits. That's totally fine, but casual plus is kind of the requirement. The standard I always tell folks to think about is, would your grandmother be embarrassed to see you dressed this way? Or if your grandma is cool, would my grandma look at you and say, oh my God, the youth of today, man, they are going downhill. That's the goal. You want to look nice enough that a judgmental grandmother would be okay with the way you're dressed. And just as a reminder, one of the reasons why we want you to look relatively nice is we do occasionally have judges, lawyers, other courthouse denizens coming through our location. And so dress like you might run into somebody who, you don't want to look, you want to look decent in front of. So anyway, basics of dress code. If you do have any questions about dress code, feel free to reach out to me at kyla.moats@wicourts.gov, or you can ask the supervisor for your specific shift if you're more comfortable with that. Reporting absences. So reporting absences is what I like to think of as low-hanging fruit. This is something I'm going to give you some specific things that we want to see from you, and these are really easy to do. And if you do them, you will make your supervisors happy and will want to write good reviews about how you can follow directions and all those kinds of things. So pay attention, because I can't tell you how many people do this wrong. So reporting absences. When you are going to be absent, you're going to let us know via email. And before I even get into all of this, you should know that you are telling us when you're going to be gone. You're not asking permission. I know a lot of folks find that counterintuitive because obviously in paid positions, you're saying, hey, am I allowed to have this time off? And then they hopefully give you permission. Within this is an unpaid internship. So you are telling us, hey, I'm not going to be there these days, and we go, okay, great, thanks. Generally, there isn't going to be pushback from us. The only time that will happen is if you've been absent so much that that we're worried that you really just don't have time to do this. But if it's just, I'm taking a vacation for 1 week in the summer, or I need 2 days off to go to my sister's wedding, that's really something where we're not judging on that. You're just saying, I can't be here for those 2 days, and we're saying, okay, fine. And along that vein, you usually actually won't get a response from us. So as I walk you through this, if you have followed all these steps, that's what you have to do to ask for time off. So you usually won't get a response to your email. Your time off is approved unless you hear otherwise. So having said all that, how do you actually ask for time off? You're going to send an email to mjcdivorce@gmail.com. That's M as in Mike, J as in Juliet, C as in Charlie, divorce@gmail.com. And you are going to copy me, kyla.moats@wicourts.gov. And you're also going to copy Joshua Butts at wicourts.gov. We want you to send this email notice as soon as you know you are going to be absent. So I get a lot of emails like, let's say you have a 1 o'clock shift and I get an email at 10 in the morning that says, oh, hey, by the way, I'm going to be in Bermuda this week. Sorry. Generally speaking, you knew you were going to be in Bermuda more than 3 hours before your shift. So please send that ahead of time. We ask for at least 24 hours notice, but there is definitely no harm in giving us more advance notice. And the reason why we want this more advance notice is because we build our schedule based on the number of people we think we're going to have. So, for example, Part 2 appointments, Part 2 divorces, which you don't really have to know what that is, but just a specific kind of form we do, is done by appointment. And we determine how many appointments we have based on how many students we expect to be there. So if you're not going to be there, that's a really important thing for us to know. And I know you're like, well, you don't need to know that far ahead of time. We're usually scheduling Part 2 appointments 6 weeks before a scheduled shift. So again, the sooner you can tell us you're not going to be there, the better. What should you include in the email? We want you to include the day, the date, the service, and the shift that you're going to miss. So going through all of these, the day I think is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to be gone on Tuesday, right? The date. So if we look at this one down here, I will miss my Tuesday morning form shift, family form shift on September 6th, 2022. You can tell this example is from a little while ago. So it's got the day, Tuesday. It has which shift, the Tuesday morning. You can list the times if that's easier. So I could have said my Tuesday 8:30 to noon shift, or you can just say Tuesday a.m. or p.m. And it says the service, family forms, and then the date, September 6th, 2022. It could be I'm going to miss my Monday afternoon expungement pardon shift on, September 5th, 2022. It could be I'm going to miss, it could be a range of dates, right? I'm going to be gone the week of the 15th. So I will miss, so then if you're going to say I'll be gone the week of 15th, you're still going to list the specific days. So I will miss my Wednesday afternoon family form shift. I will miss my Thursday afternoon helpline shift, and I will miss my Friday morning family form shift, and then you'll put in the dates for those as well. So just make sure that specific information. This is the step most people screw up, is they don't include all this information. They just say, I'm going to be gone the week of the 15th. There are a lot of you, and so I don't necessarily know all of your schedules off the top of my head, so it's really helpful if you can give me this information so I don't have to go looking for it. For those of you who do this internship for credit, so if you just do this for the heck of it, then you just need to tell us when you won't be here. For those of you that do the internship for credit, so if you are getting class credit, or if you are someone who does like a work study program or something where you will need us to sign off on an hour sheet and where you have a set number of required hours, then your email must include either a proposal of how you're going to make the hours up. So I'm missing my Tuesday morning form shift on September 6th, 2022. I am proposing that I will pick up a Friday morning shift the following week, or what have you. Again, whatever your proposal is. Or it should include the statement that you do not need them to make your required hours. So if your schedule gives you 120 hours this semester and you only need 100, then you can say, I will miss my Tuesday morning family forum shift on September 6th, but I don't anticipate needing those hours to meet my internship requirement. So do make sure you include that. Again, only required if you're doing this for credit. I'm sure some of you who are doing this for credit are like, well, you know what? I know I'm going to need to make the hours up, but I don't know how to make them up. So if that's the case, then because you are letting us know well ahead of time, like an A+ student, you will go ahead and check in with your shift supervisor or with me and say, hey, I know I'm going to be out. I need to make up these hours. How can I do that? So again, just be thinking ahead. Really big thing about getting your hours credited. And then, as I said, just a reminder, because this is something that people really do seem to have trouble with. Your hours are approved. Your time off is approved unless you hear from us that it is not. So most of the time you won't hear back. You'll just say, I'm not going to be there, and that email counts. Just a few things to know about absences. I mentioned sort of in the abstract. Well, let me go through these one by one. I'm sorry that I have a little trouble going in order. So things we don't want you to do. These are the no-nos. Don't no-call, no-show more than once. We give you one mulligan. I'm going to be honest with you. Don't no-call, no-show ever. It's a bad look. However, once everyone gets a mulligan, we accept that sometimes you're going to sleep through your alarm or something's going to happen. But do not do it more than once. Some things that you should know about that. So I just went through for like 5, 6, 7 minutes. I talked about how to report your absences. Some of you are still going to try saying to your supervisor on the way out, hey, I'm going to be gone on Thursday, bye. That doesn't count. So if you told a supervisor orally about an absence and that supervisor doesn't remember, which by the way, they absolutely will not, that counts as a no-call, no-show because you did not follow the absence requirements I laid out a couple of minutes ago. So don't do that. Again, we have minds like sieves. We're thinking about other things. We're going to forget. So do send that email. And similarly, I mentioned before, we do expect you to give us at least 24 hours notice. If you don't give us 24 hours notice, absent an emergency, it counts as a no-call, no-show. You may be thinking, well, what counts as an emergency? I mean, you guys know this, right? You wake up in the morning, you're throwing up. There's no way you're going to be able to come to clinic. You shoot us an email saying, hey, I'm not going to make it because I'm sick. We get that. You're driving to the clinic and you get a flat tire. Sorry, guys, I'm not going to make it in. I blew a tire and it's going to take me a couple hours to get it fixed. We totally get it. You know, somebody, you had to take your grandma to the emergency room. Somebody sadly passed away, anything like that. But just make sure that you're giving us 24 hours notice unless it is an emergency. And just make sure, I have occasionally had folks who have emergencies every week. I suppose it is possible, but after the third or fourth emergency, I am going to start wondering if perhaps you are making up emergencies. So, just be aware that in a 13, I've literally had people in a 13-week internship who have said they've had emergencies in all 13 weeks. Because I've told you before, we're generally approving your time. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to say no, but I will admit to you, I will be skeptical by the time we hit the 13th emergency. So just something to kind of be aware of. Here, this is a pretty obvious one, but follow the directions I sent before. So don't send your notices of absence to just MJC Divorce or to just me or to just Josh. There will be at least one of you who will send it just to me, and that doesn't work. Or you'll send it just to MJC Divorce. That also doesn't work. I know it seems tedious, but there's a reason I do ask you to copy all 3 folks on that. Mentioning again, don't tell us orally instead of sending an email. That happens a lot, and again, we do not have the memory capacity for that. Another thing, don't assume the MJC is closed just because you have a school break or anything like that. I know that we always it's less common in the summer, and I know we're doing this for the summer, But just make sure, again, if there's some sort of holiday or something like that, make sure you're double checking that we are closed. Broadly, we are closed when the courthouse is closed. We'll have a couple of additional days off and things like that, but just keep an eye on it. Again, for those of you who do this internship for credit, make sure you are keeping up with your hours. If you're going to miss a shift, make sure that you know how that is going to impact your hours. Definitely don't want you sending me an email, the week your hours are due saying, hey, I'm 40 hours short. Or even worse, hey, can you tell me how many hours I have? So you should be keeping track of those. And when you have an absence, you should be keeping track of, is that going to make you short on your hours and how are you going to make that up? Again, since you are supposed to report in your email requesting the absence or in your email notifying us of the absence, since you are supposed to give us the information about how you're going to make it up, I hope that means you'll all be thinking about that. Last but not least, we do ask you not to miss the equivalent of 2 weeks worth of shifts over the course of the semester. Of course, there are always going to be some exceptions. Some of you may have talked to us in the beginning about, hey, I need to, miss a couple of weeks because of this or because of that. But if it's not something we talked about prior, and again, you can see here that's waived by prior written consent. For the most part, if you're missing 2 weeks worth of shifts, again, 2 weeks is about 15% of a 13-week semester. If you're going to miss more than that, we start to get into the range where that may be an issue. So if you know you're going to miss that much, make sure that you are sending an email so we can talk about that. If you don't know that you're going to miss that much, but it just happens, just know that, again, 2 weeks worth of shifts is when you're going to start to get potentially emails from us saying, hey, it seems like maybe you don't have time for this, or is there something going on we can help with? So yeah, keep an eye on that. And I guess I should note 2 weeks worth of shifts. Those of you who do 2 shifts per week, again, that would mean if you miss 4 shifts. Those of you who have 3 shifts per week, that would mean 6. If you do 4 shifts per week, 8. I don't think very many people are doing more than 4 shifts in a week, but if you do have more than 4 shifts, again, just however many you do in a week times 2. All right. So moving on to the next one, major schedule changes. So absences and minor schedule changes, that's really, I'm not going to be there for this shift, or next week I'm going to need to be late, or things like that. Major schedule changes is if you are adding or dropping a shift entirely, right? I need to get rid of my Monday afternoon shift. I can't do it anymore. I actually am doing this for credit, and I've realized I need to add an entire shift. For those, you're going to email kyla.moats@wicourts.gov and copy Joshua Butts at wicourts.gov for forms changes. You guys will get a training if you're on the helpline, but broadly speaking for the helpline, that's going to be reversed. So you're going to email Josh and then copy me. So just make sure you run those by us. I have had some people who just kind of unilaterally change their schedule, stop coming in or saying they have an emergency every single shift. It's something where you want to go ahead and change that schedule with us. So very quickly, recording your hours. So we will have all of you record your hours. And I know for those of you who are doing this for credit, that makes perfect sense, right? You'll sign in and sign out for a shift. That allows us to keep track of when you were here. So at the end of your internship, when you bring me a sheet to sign off on, I can do that pretty easily. For those of you who are just doing this for the heck of it, you might be like, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm not doing this for credit. We do want you to go ahead and do it anyway. The first is because when I'm doing reviews and recommendations for you, you want me to say they were good at following directions, they listened to the training, they knew what they were supposed to do. But also, it is important on our end for us to keep track of how many volunteers we have and how many hours they do. That is something that we as a nonprofit can use to help get grants and different funding things, and some of the accountability metrics that we have to meet with the different schools we work with. So that's one reason. Another reason is down the line, invariably I will get people who want to confirm your employment with us. So it may be that you don't want to use me as a reference, but you have an employer that requires you to list any job or internship you've had in the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of the bar exams do that. It could be that we get a cold call. So you didn't give my name to someone, but they saw you worked with our internship and they give me a call because they're familiar with me. And so they want to check in. Whatever the reason, it's really useful for me to be able to say, yeah, they did this semester with us. They did this many hours over the course of a semester, especially when those calls come in later. So at the end of this summer, I'll be great. I'll know how many hours most of you worked. I'll know, roughly what your schedules were. But 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line, I probably won't remember all of those details. I may remember you. I may remember you were great, but I probably won't remember how many hours you did or what your specific schedule was. And additionally, there could be a time where I am no longer the person verifying those. And so somebody down the line who actually wasn't here for that will need those hours. So it's really important that we have a record for you in addition to for us. So it's for both sets of people. So just make sure we want you signing in and signing out for those in-person shifts. Again, when you get the training for the helpline, they'll have some more information about how they do that. You get credit for the entire shift. So what will happen a lot of times is you'll come in, you'll start, let's say, your 8:30 a.m. shift, and then about 11:30, you check in and you say, do you have anything else for me? And we say, nope, we actually got through all of the clients for today. At that point, we may have some tasks for you. We might ask you to fill up printers or deal with some stocking things or things like that. But often you may get to leave a little bit early. That's fair enough. As long as you were available for the entire shift, you get credit for the entire shift. So if I get to leave at 11:30, I still get to claim from 8:30 until noon. The only exception is if your internship does not allow that. So if you're working to do this for credit and your internship coordinator says they won't allow taking credit for that time where you were available but we didn't have a client, then we can't do it. But for anybody else, so for those of you doing it for the hell of it and those of you where your internship says that's fine with us, you get credit for the entire shift. If you are not available for the whole shift, so if you send us an email and say, hey, I have to leave by 11:30, if then we get to the shift and we release you at 11:15, you still only get credit to 11:30. Basically, you get credit to the time you set aside. So if you tell me you're going to miss, I'm going to have to leave at 10, I have to leave at 10:30, you only get credit until the time you told me you were no longer going to be able to be there. If you are available for the whole time, then you get credit through the end time. If you go over, which is not a super common occurrence, but it does happen occasionally, you'll go a few minutes over, or a supervisor may check in and see if you're comfortable finishing a form off. You get credit for that overage time. So if you are scheduled, again, 8:30 to noon, but you're working really hard with a client and you end up going to 12:15 or 12:30, you do get credit for that overage time. So you get credit basically to the scheduled end of the shift, unless you go over, in which case you get the overage time as well. You do not get credit for arriving early. I know, it's a bummer, but I will get people that show up at 7:30 and try and take that hour. Again, we don't have anything for you to do before your shift starts, so you should be on time. You're not required to be early, but you don't get credit for any time you're there before the start time of the shift. You are able to check your hours. So if you're curious how many hours you've done, or if you want to include that in a resume or something like that, you can find those in Visys. Visys is our record keeping system, and there's a website for it there. To log into that system, it's going to be your name and your email address. Some of you are going to go try this right away. Please know that we don't get your account set up usually until the day or two before the internship starts. So we are scheduled to start May 22nd. So that is when I anticipate your Visys accounts will be up and running. You can check that now if you want, but if it returns an error, don't freak out. That just means we haven't gotten that all set up yet. You can check your information there. It will also give you the option to record your hours. Don't do that. We record your hours on the back end. So We will record your hours based on the sign-in sheet, but you can use that to verify that your hours look correct. For those of you who do this for credit, do make sure if I'm going to need to sign off on your hours, don't just print the Visas sheet. We actually have an hours log where you have to transfer the information from Visas to the hours log itself. As I said, Visas, your username is your email address. Your password is also your email address. You can change that once you log in. Very important piece of information here. If you have trouble logging into the Visas system, again, if you don't care, if you do this for the hell of it, you have trouble logging in and you say, oh, well, great. But if you're like, yeah, I've got to get into this, or I'd like to get into this, I need somebody to explain to me why it's not working, you're going to email me. On the website for Visas, it says to email a Marquette email for the Public Interest Law Society. Do not email them. They do not know who you are. You're going to email me. We piggyback on their system. So we use it. It has that notation for their primary users, the Marquette Law students. If you're a Marquette Law student, by all means, use that. But if you're watching this training, you almost certainly aren't a Marquette Law student. So you will contact me if you have issues with Visas. All right, moving on from my very long tirade about absences and recording hours. Again, I hope you guys will take that stuff to heart. It's the low-hanging fruit. But now we're going to get into a little bit more of the substantive stuff we do. Confidentiality. So confidentiality is something that we are required to provide to our clients in this clinic setting. You will also have signed off on a confidentiality waiver for using the CCAP system, so make sure that you review that as well. But basically, when we're talking about confidentiality, we protect our clients' information and we don't share it with other people unless we are compelled to do so by a court order. So what does that mean? At a basic level, it means you're not going to steal or misuse any client or case information, right? People give us their socials. They give us information about their financials, their bank accounts, their pay stubs, things like that. At a very surface level, this means you are not going to misuse any of that information. All you're going to do is use it to enter the information into the form like we're supposed to. Another sort of the next level to it is we also will protect clients' confidentiality when we're using the CCAP system. So you all hopefully read those documents about confidentiality in CCAP. If you did not, go ahead and take another look at them. But the biggest thing that will come up in clinics that I want you to take note of is we do not use the internal CCAP system to find addresses for the clients. I'm going to go ahead and say that again. We do not use the internal CCAP system to find an address for the other party, okay? There will absolutely be a time when you are working with someone and you're going to like them and you're going to feel really bad about the fact that they don't know where to find their ex. And they're going to tell you, well, you have it. You have the address in your system and you can go get it. Please go get it for me. I need you to. And there are going to be some of you who are going to get up and say, okay, and you're going to amble over to CCAP and you're going to get that address. And I'm going to see you doing that. I'm going to stop you and I'm going to say, what in the world are you doing? And you're going to be like, I'm getting the address from CCAP. And I'm going to be like, okay, they didn't watch the training. So those of you who are here watching the training, we do not use the internal CCAP system. Those are the private CCAP computers that we have that have more access to court records to give out addresses. There are times when that information can be given out, but because we don't make you go through the complex training to understand when it can be and when it can't be, our sort of blanket rule is we never do. If it's something where you really are trying to figure out how can I help this person, talk to the supervisor. One thing you can also try is the public CCAP. So on the computers where you're sitting working with the client, you can pull up the public access version of CCAP. If you find the client's address there, perfect. But you can't use that internal use CCAP machine for client addresses. So just be careful with that information. Again, a second part of confidentiality, because the CCAP system is probably one of the places we have the most ability to accidentally give away confidential information. And so you really want to be sure you know what information you're allowed to give out from that internal CCAP. So the internal CCAP, again, the records that just we have access to in clinic. Always err on the side of caution. So if you're not sure if you can give it out, don't give it out. Ask the supervisor and we can determine if it's something we're able to give out. Another way that you will protect client confidentiality is when you're discussing your experiences. So I hope that you enjoy what you do with us, and I want you to talk to your friends and your colleagues about it, and your parents, your family. I want you to tell everybody what a great time you have or how much you're learning in our clinics. I hope that's something that happens. But when you are talking about situations you see in clinic, you need to make sure that you are not using client names or using enough detail about the person, the client, that the person you're speaking to can figure out who you're talking about. So for example, you might say, I was working with a client today and they had a really interesting case where we were dealing with an arrears overpayment, and they had an order out of Kentucky, and that was really strange working with another state. Or I guess instead of Kentucky, you actually should probably say they had an order out of another state, which was really strange, right? So I worked with client about arrears and the order came from another state. That's pretty generic. The person you're talking to is very unlikely to know who you're talking about. Versus if you say, I worked with Joe Schmo today, and I got to tell you, his life is a wreck. He's got 3 exes with 4 different kids, and these are their names. And they're, one of them lives in Kentucky, and the other lives in Sheboygan, and the other, all those details are going to make it so even if Joe Schmo has a pretty common name, somebody could figure out who you're talking about. So we want to make sure we're talking generically, generally about the experiences. Either broadly, I see a lot of clients and a lot of them don't know how to serve the other person, or I was working with somebody specific and it was crazy because they were trying to serve the other person who lives out of the country, right? They live in another country. Totally fine to give that level of detail because there are lots of people who have an ex who lives out of the country. So that's not an identifying piece of information. Last but not least, and this is something that I'm going to go ahead and say now, but I know sometimes you kind of need to see it in person to really understand what it means. But make sure that you are exiting out of forms before you bring in a new client. So you're going to work on a form with the first client. You're going to fill it out. You're going to print it out for them. You're going to send them on their way. Then you're going to take some notes, and then you're going to bring in another client. Before you bring in that second client, client B, make sure you have exited out of all of client A's forms, because otherwise you may accidentally pull up those forms that have client A's name, address, phone number, email address on them. That information is stuff we are supposed to keep confidential. And if you have it pulled up so that client B can read it, you have broken confidentiality with client A. Similarly, one of the things you're going to do on your shifts is you're going to search our Salesforce system to see if the person you're working with has ever been here before. So when client B comes in, or hopefully before they come in, you're going to search their name to see if we have them. Sometimes you're going to learn that, we had their name spelled wrong, or they actually have been here before and they're surprised they don't have a profile. And you're going to want to search again. We can't run those searches in front of the clients because it reveals other client names that are in the database. So you either need to go to a different computer to run your search, or what you can do is turn the screen so the client can't see it, but you can when you run that search. So just make sure when you're in the Salesforce database, which you're going to learn a lot more about later in our training, make sure that you're being careful to protect that information, because that does have a lot of client information that we don't want the other clients to be able to see. Conflicts of interest. We are sort of a strange clinic in that we often see both sides of a case, and that's okay. So if any of you have ever worked at, say, a law firm, you know that for law firms, it's a huge no-no to have both sides of a case consult with you. But because we give legal information, not legal advice, in our case, it is okay. We still, though, try not to have you personally work with both parties, because even though technically we can, we think that it doesn't necessarily look good. We want to make sure that people are comfortable and they aren't concerned that something they tell you, you might inadvertently tell to the other party in their case. So if you ever sit down with someone and you realize, oh, I worked with their spouse, just let the supervisor know and we can get you swapped out with somebody else. If there is a client that you know socially, definitely let the supervisor know about that. So, oh, hey, this is my cousin, this is my friend, this is somebody I met down at the coffee shop. Do let the supervisor know. In theory, you can work with them, but we need to make sure both sides are comfortable. It's definitely something we try to avoid, but check in with the supervisor so that they can deal with that and make sure that we're sort of going forward however we want to do that. If you run into a client you've worked with in a legal context, again, you're always checking in with the supervisor on that. Often you will be truly conflicted out in that case. So if you, oh yeah, I work at a law firm and we work with the other party in this case, you are actually probably conflicted out of working with that client, even in our brief legal advice, or I'm sorry, not our brief legal advice clinics. We do not give legal advice in the forms clinic. Even in our forms clinic where we do not give legal advice, you're still probably conflicted out. Even if you've worked on that person's side, so even if you say, oh yeah, I worked with them through Sojourner on doing their restraining order, you're still going to want to check in with the supervisor so we can make sure we're complying with all the required ethical rules. Just a couple more in basics here. Vaccine requirements. In our most recent update that we have gotten from the county, we are still under a COVID vaccine requirement. I know that we've sort of hit a point where COVID isn't something you're talking about as much, but the courthouse has never formally rescinded their vaccine requirement. So as of right now, in-person volunteers are generally required to be vaccinated. That's defined as getting that first couple of shots of the mRNA. So if you got if you got any of the original shots, that would count. And they only require one shot of the Johnson & Johnson, even though that got moved up to 2. Moderna, Pfizer both qualify for those or their international equivalents. We obviously recommend any boosters that you qualify for. You're going to see a high level of people in our clinics, but that's ultimately up to you. If you come to an in-person clinic, you are representing that you are vaccinated. Misrepresenting your vaccination status is grounds for termination from the internship. If you are somebody who isn't vaccinated, if you're willing to disclose that information, you can shoot me an email at kylamotes@wicourts.gov. Again, kyla.motes@wicourts.gov, and we can discuss your options. This is something where there may be some options depending on sort of your reasoning. So that's something that we can talk through if that's a problem that you have. If you don't want to give us your vaccine status, or if you aren't vaccinated but you don't want to talk through your options, you can let me know and we can try and set you up with just remote options for your internship. A few more things before we finish with this first video. Close contacts and symptoms. So again, I know COVID is something that is really sort of waning in public life, but the courthouse is slow in how it moves, and so we do still have some requirements that do apply to volunteers as well as for full-time staff. So if you have COVID symptoms or test positive for COVID, you're not able to come into the clinic. Some of the COVID symptoms: fever, chills, cough, difficulty breathing, fatigue, headaches, loss of taste, smell, sore throat, all that kind of stuff. That is unusual for you. Obviously, if you're somebody that gets a sore throat anytime the pollen gets above X count, that's one thing, but things that are unusual for you. Don't come to an in-person MJC if you are sick. We have a decision tree that is linked in our supplemental materials that sort of lets you know when you can return to the MJC, so use that guidance. If you're exposed or you have a close contact, again, we have some decision trees that walk you through what you can do. If you've been vaccinated, broadly speaking, you can come to the MJC unless you have symptoms or something like that, and go ahead and follow the decision trees in the supplemental materials for those sorts of things. Last but not least, when you come to our in-person clinics, there is a security screening. It's very similar to what you go through at the airport. There are a lot of items that are not allowed through security. They keep a full list. We have a link in our supplemental materials. You can also find it through the sheriff's website, through this milwaukeecounty.gov website here. But a non-exhaustive list of things you shouldn't bring in: aerosols, which includes hairspray, alcohol of any kind, bottle openers, can openers, corkscrews, that includes keychains that have bottle openers or corkscrews on them, nail clippers, nail files, hairpins, scissors, tape measures, combs with sharp or pointy ends. So keep an eye on your purses or backpacks, often a place where somebody might keep a comb. Blow dryers, which I've had students complain about getting taken away before, which is why I list it. Silverware of any kind. It does say on the website that it's just metal silverware, but I can tell you we've definitely had folks have plastic knives taken away as well. Basically anything that could be described as a weapon: knives, guns, axes, swords, nunchucks, brass knuckles, or replicas of any of those. So I feel like most of that is intuitive, but if it isn't, or if you just want to make sure all your stuff will get through, do check out the full list of things you can't bring in. All right, well, that is all for this first video. Thank you guys for listening. As a reward for reaching the end here, I will tell you that my favorite basketball team is the UConn Huskies. Now, you may be wondering why I told you that. I told you that because at the end of watching all 3 trainings, you're going to send me an email that's going to include my favorite basketball team, my favorite video game, and my favorite Olympic sport. So the first part of your passcode here is that my favorite basketball team is the UConn Huskies. The women's team, if that's important. But you'll get credit if you say UConn Huskies, even if you don't clarify that it is the UConn women's team. All right. That is all for this video. I will see you guys for the next one.